Rehana Khan, a wealthy widow searching for love, and Arjun Malhotra, a desperate immigrant chasing a visa, seemed like an unlikely pair, but their secret affair in Dubai would spiral into greed, betrayal, and a brutal murder that shocked the city. Rehana Khan's life looked flawless from the outside. She lived in a grand villa in Jumeirah, one of Dubai's most exclusive neighborhoods. The white walls of her mansion gleamed under the desert sun, and expensive cars lined the driveway. She had everything that money could buy: designer clothes, diamonds, and staff who attended to her every need. But behind the glamorous image, she carried a quiet emptiness that no amount of luxury could erase. Years ago, she had been the devoted wife of Imran Khan, a construction magnate whose company built skyscrapers that defined Dubai's skyline. Their marriage had been filled with love and respect, and together they raised a son who was now pursuing his degree in London. But after Imran's sudden death from a heart attack, her world had changed overnight. The business empire became hers to manage, the fortune secured her position in high society, yet the companionship she once had disappeared forever. Despite being surrounded by wealth, Rehana was lonely. Nights in the mansion stretched on endlessly, the silence echoing through every hallway. She often found herself staring at old photo albums, replaying memories of happier times. Friends visited occasionally, mostly other wealthy widows or society women, but their company was shallow, filled with gossip and pretenses. Her son's rare calls from abroad gave her comfort, but they lasted only a few minutes before he returned to his studies and busy life. She longed for warmth, for laughter, for someone who could make her feel like more than just a rich widow. Dubai's elite circles whispered about her. Some admired her strength in keeping the family empire intact, while others pitied her for living in such isolation. The pressure to remarry was unspoken but constant. Suitors from wealthy families occasionally tried to approach her, but Rehana turned them away. She wasn't interested in arrangements built on money and status. She already had both. What she missed was the emotional bond, the sense of being loved for who she truly was rather than what she owned. As the months turned into years, her vulnerability became more visible. She began attending charity events and social gatherings, hoping to fill the void with meaningful causes and new acquaintances. But beneath her elegant exterior, her heart was fragile. Her loneliness made her more trusting, more open to the possibility of letting someone new into her life. It was in this fragile state, while searching for companionship and belonging, that she would soon encounter a man who saw her not as a grieving widow, but as an opportunity to exploit. And that meeting would set in motion a story that ended in betrayal and blood. Arjun Malhotra's arrival in Dubai was not marked by luxury or comfort. He came with little more than a suitcase, a fading passport, and a restless hunger for success. Born in a modest household in India, he had grown up watching his parents struggle to provide for him and his siblings. The small town he came from offered him no real future, and he had always dreamed of escaping to a city where fortunes were built overnight. Dubai, with its glittering towers and endless opportunities, seemed like the perfect place to reinvent himself. But reality struck him quickly. Work was hard to find, and when he did secure jobs, they were small, temporary, and poorly paid. He spent long hours under the scorching sun at construction sites, his hands blistered, his back aching, only to earn enough to cover rent for a cramped room he shared with 3 other men. For someone who wanted more than survival, this life felt suffocating. Arjun was ambitious, but ambition without opportunity can turn dangerous. He watched other immigrants build steady lives, some through years of discipline, others through clever shortcuts. He realized that patience wasn't in his nature. His work visa had an expiration date, and the thought of returning to his small town empty-handed terrified him. He refused to accept defeat, not after seeing the wealth that surrounded him every day. In his mind, there had to be another way to climb the ladder without breaking his body at construction sites. It was during these restless nights, lying awake on his thin mattress, that he formed a plan. He began studying the lifestyles of the wealthy women of Dubai, widows and divorcees who lived in mansions but lacked companionship. To Arjun, They weren't people burdened by grief, they were golden opportunities. He knew that many of them, lonely and vulnerable, were desperate for attention, and he had the one weapon that could get him close: charm. Unlike the men who labored silently around him, Arjun was smooth with words, confident in his appearance, and unafraid of bold moves. He told himself he could give these women what they longed for, but in return he would take what he needed most: wealth, influence, and most importantly, a permanent visa. When he first heard the name Rehana Khan at a charity event, his instinct sharpened. She wasn't just rich, she was powerful and alone, the perfect target. From that moment on, Arjun stopped chasing small jobs and started focusing on his new mission. Winning her trust was no longer just a goal, it was his lifeline. Rehana's guarded world began to shift the moment Arjun stepped into her life. Their first meeting was brief, but he left an impression that lingered. Unlike the polished businessmen and opportunists she was used to, Arjun carried an energy that felt raw and unfiltered. He spoke with a confidence that bordered on daring, and his compliments were direct in a way that disarmed her. What began as casual encounters soon grew into private meetings, where his charm steadily wrapped around her loneliness. For the first time in years, she felt noticed not as a widow, not as a wealthy woman, but as someone desired. Arjun played his role carefully, always balancing warmth with intensity. He showered her with attention, sending her messages late at night, showing up unannounced with flowers, and speaking words that made her believe in love again. To Rehana, it was intoxicating. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be pursued, to be admired for something beyond her fortune. Against the quiet warnings of her close friends, she let her guard down, convinced that this younger man's passion was genuine. To the world outside, their affair was scandalous, whispered about in hushed tones, but Rehana no longer cared. She had found companionship, and she was willing to risk the criticism that came with it. Behind the mask of devotion, however, Arjun's thoughts were darker. Each gesture of affection was calculated, each promise a step toward his goal. He told her stories of his struggles, of how he longed to build a life in due. By carefully planting seeds of sympathy, he made her believe he was vulnerable, a man who needed her strength, when in truth, it was her wealth and influence he sought. In private, with his friends, he bragged about how close he was to securing his future, boasting that his relationship with Rehana would soon open doors he could never have reached on his own. The deeper Rehana fell into the affair, the more control Arjun gained. She introduced him to her home, her routines, even her son over video calls, weaving him into the most personal parts of her life. Yet she ignored the small cracks that appeared, the times he grew irritated when she questioned his background, the way his charm would turn cold whenever she hesitated about marriage. Still, she convinced herself it was love tested by pressure, not manipulation. What she didn't realize was that for Arjun, every moment with her was not about building a future together, but about tightening a trap that he had carefully set from the very beginning. The affair that once felt like an escape from loneliness slowly began to show its darker edges. Rehana noticed subtle changes in Arjun's behavior. His once gentle words often turned sharp, and his patience seemed to vanish whenever conversations about their future stalled. She wanted more time, still grieving her late husband, still unsure if rushing into marriage was right. But for Arjun, every passing week was a threat. His work visa was nearing expiration, and without Rehana's legal support, his dream of staying in Dubai would collapse. Fear of being forced back to his old life in India gnawed at him. What had once been an act of calculated seduction began to fester into resentment. Arjun masked his frustration in public, but behind closed doors his anger simmered. He had invested months into weaving himself into Rehana's life, and now he felt she was holding back the one thing he needed most. Money and affection no longer satisfied him. He wanted permanence, power, and security. Rehana's hesitation became, in his mind, betrayal. He started pushing harder, asking about marriage papers, demanding commitments, and questioning her loyalty. Rehana, overwhelmed by his intensity, began to pull away. She told herself that perhaps she had rushed into the relationship, that maybe the warnings from her friends had not been baseless. This distance only fueled Arjun's desperation. On a humid summer evening, the tension finally erupted. Rehana returned home late from a social gathering, only to find Arjun waiting inside her villa, restless and agitated. Their argument escalated quickly, his voice raised, hers trembling with both fear and disappointment. She tried to reason with him, but Arjun no longer saw reason. To him, every refusal, every hesitation, was proof that she would never give him the life he craved. The thought of losing everything he had schemed for consumed him until he could no longer hold back. What happened next shattered the illusion of love forever. In a violent outburst, Arjun attacked the very woman who had once offered him trust and affection. The lavish home that had symbolized Rehana's wealth and safety turned into the place of her final moments. The silence of her mansion, once heavy with loneliness, was now marked by tragedy. For Arjun, there was no turning back. In that single night of rage, he destroyed not only Rehana's life, but also the future he had been so desperate to secure. The aftermath of Rehana's death sent shockwaves through Dubai's high society. News spread quickly. One of the city's most respected widows, found lifeless in her own home. The investigation began immediately, and police treated the case with urgency. Rehana's mansion, once a symbol of wealth and elegance, was transformed into a crime scene, every corner examined for clues. Forensic experts combed through the property, gathering fingerprints, reviewing security footage, and speaking with neighbors. What they uncovered painted a clear picture. Arjun Malhotra, the man many had suspected was too close to Rehana, had been the last person seen entering the villa on the night of her death. Arjun's attempt to escape was clumsy. He left the house in a panic, unaware that every street in Dubai seemed to have cameras watching. CCTV footage tracked his movements from Rehana's gated community to a rundown apartment complex where he had been staying. By the time authorities arrived, he was already trying to arrange a way out of the country. He had no money, no plan, and nowhere to run. Within days he was captured, his face no longer that of a confident charmer, but of a man cornered by his own choices. The trial that followed exposed every detail of his deceit. Prosecutors laid out his motives with precision: the desperation for a visa, the manipulation of Rehana's loneliness, and the premeditated nature of his actions. Witnesses came forward, including friends who admitted Arjun had bragged about securing his future through Rehana. Text messages, phone records, and financial traces all revealed a calculated pattern of exploitation. The man who once portrayed himself as a devoted lover was unmasked as a manipulative predator who saw people as tools for his ambitions. For Rehana's family, especially her son abroad, the revelations were devastating. He had believed his mother was finally finding happiness again, only to learn that her vulnerability had been weaponized against her. The courtroom was filled with sorrow and anger as the verdict was announced. Arjun was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. In the end, justice was served, but the tragedy left scars far deeper than a prison sentence could heal. Rehana's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that trust given in desperation can sometimes invite the darkest betrayals. Her wealth had shielded her from many things in life, but not from the manipulations of a man willing to destroy everything for the promise of power and permanence.